It's supposed to be a clear day here at Poppy Corners, although there have been a couple of sprinkles. Let's brew beer. An important part of brewing beer is being able to heat up water and heat up large quantities of water. Here's my setup. I've got a propane tank hooked up to really a turkey fryer type of setup with a big old pot of water. I've got about 4 gallons of water in there. Let's light it up. All right, so our water's heating up. Time to look at some of the rest of our kit that we've got for brewing beer. As you can see, I've got a 5-gallon orange cooler from a local home improvement store. And I've outfitted it with a spigot on the bottom. I've replaced the spigot on the bottom. And there's a screen on the inside here, a little tube connecting to that spigot. This is my converted beverage cooler mash tun. And what we use it for is we're going to take this water that we've heated up and we're going to add some grain to it. Some malted barley that's been milled. That's what it looks like. That's a little sample of it. We're going to add, for this recipe, I'm going to add about 11.5 pounds of it, of a couple different kinds, about 4 different kinds. We're going to let that set for an hour, and what's going to happen is that the hot water is going to extract the sugars from this grain. And the sugars are what the yeast is going to eat to make alcohol and carbon dioxide and make beer. Okay, so we've got our water in the cooler. It's up to temperature now. Time to start adding our grain. Okay, so we've got our grain all added in. Now we wait for about an hour. It's a little like making oatmeal. It's that same kind of a consistency. While we're waiting, we'll also heat up some more water for the next part of our process. We let our grain soak for an hour, our mash soak for an hour, and now it's time for the next part of our process, where we're called sparging. Homebrewing has a lot of neat words. So here's what's happening. I've got a tank full of hot water, about 170 degrees up at the top here. I've got a hose going down over to our mash tun, feeding some water in here, and then our wort is coming out of the bottom of our mash tun and going into our pot. We're going to let this go for about an hour. And the only real tricky thing here is that you want to do this kind of slowly, and you need to make sure that the rate of water coming out of the bottom is the same as the rate of the stuff coming out, the water coming out of the top here. So I'm running a little low right now, so I'm going to just kind of increase this a little bit. We want to keep a nice level of water on the top here. All right, so we'll let this go for about 45 minutes, an hour, and then we're on to our next process. I spoke for a second about what we're doing, but I didn't really talk about why we're doing this. So you'll remember that what we were doing with our hot water and our grain is we were extracting all the sugars out of it. And so now what we need to do, the reason that we're using some clean water coming in here, is we're washing off the grain. We're making sure that we're extracting as much sugar as we can out of the grain and getting it into our pot. Here's our hydrometer. It's measuring the specific gravity of our wort, which is a measure of how much sugar is in there. This is the wort that we pulled out right at the beginning, and you can see it's sitting at about 1.08 something. So that's pretty good. This will go down as we continue with our sparging process, and we'll measure this again once we get a couple different times during the whole process here. Well, would you look at that? The honeybees come over to visit us. Wonder what it's looking for. Our sparging process is almost complete at this point. If we come over, I did another sample in the hydrometer, and you can see, I mean, right away, you can see it's a lot of a lighter color. You can see it's sticking up a lot less. And so, again, it's hard to see with all the bubbles, but it's sitting around 1.01 right now. Okay, so our sparging process is complete. I've got the fire on under the wort again now. I've got about 6.5 gallons of wort in the pot. We're going to bring this to a boil and boil it for a while and add some hops at a couple different intervals during that process. One of the questions you might ask is, well, what do you do with all this grain that you've got left over? Well, we'll show you that in a second here. Now, while some of our spent grain winds up just going in the compost, the chickens also enjoy it quite a bit. Alright, we're coming up on a boil now. We got to keep an eye on this, otherwise it's going to boil over. Once we get to a nice rolling boil, we're going to add hops at different times. We'll add hops towards the beginning of the boiling process for bitterness, and we'll add hops towards the end of the process for aroma. I've got 3 different kinds of hops that we're going to use today. We've got some Nugget, we've got some Kent Goldings, and we've got some Willamette from up in Oregon. We're almost at the end of boiling up the wort. We've added hops a couple of different times, and once we're done, we're going to turn off the heat, and then we're going to have to cool this down pretty quickly. Let me show you the rig that I've got. The heart of the rig is a set of copper tubing. I've had it sitting in the wort for the last 10 minutes so that it'll sterilize. Once we start cooling things down, we have to start worrying about sterilization. So here that is, and that's sitting in the wort. And there's a lot of different chillers that are out there that use water, but of course we want to be a little conscious about our water usage. We don't want to just hook it up to a hose and then have it run out into the street. So what I've got rigged up here is a recirculating system. We've got an old palm pump at the bottom, and it's sitting in a cooler full of water. We've got some ice over here that I picked up, and I'm going to use that to keep things cool too. And then so the pump will pump the water, it'll go through the copper coil, chill down the wort, hot water will come back into the cooler, and just keep on going and going and going until we're down to our temperature. Alright, so here we are cooling. Here's my cooler full of ice water. Cold water's coming out, up into the chiller, through all that copper tubing. Hot water's coming back down. You can really, if you could feel this hose here, you can feel it's pretty warm. Coming back into here. It's been 45 minutes and we're down from boiling to about 76 degrees. So time to wrap up this final part of our process. Time to transfer our wort over to the bucket that I use for brewing. It's not the fanciest bucket in the world, but it works well. It's got a little spigot on the side here that we'll use later to transfer things out. It's really a bottling bucket. It's really, and maybe we'll shoot some videos some other time talking about that. But I've just got a little siphon rig siphoning out the wort from my pot here. And I'm just going to sit here. It's a little doodad on the end of my hose here. It's supposed to spray a little better, but in any case, what we're doing is we're aerating our wort a little bit. The yeast needs some oxygen to get going, and so by pushing this through a little bit like this, the idea is at least that you're getting a little more oxygen inside this. So we certainly are making a lot of bubbles. All right, we're almost done with our process. I'm taking a final specific gravity here. It's a little hard to see with the bubbles, but I've looked at this when I'm not trying to hold the camera, and I'm going to call it a 1.055. The final quick temperature check shows that we're at 74 degrees. A couple degrees higher than what I'd really optimally want, but pretty good. We wound up with a little more than 4.5 gallons here. Again, I was shooting for 5, but this is not bad at all. So now for our last part of this process, we're going to pitch the yeast. The yeast I use comes in these little packets. You keep it refrigerated. This is a California ale yeast. And I'm going to just cut this open and dump it in. I've got a whisk here that I'm going to use to kind of whisk it around, give it a good stir, and then I'll put the lid on, and we'll bring this whole thing inside. All right, I've got the lid snapped on. You'll see that the lid has this little device on the top here. It's an airlock. It's got water in it. And so what's going to happen is that as the yeast eats the sugars and the wort here, it's going to turn it into alcohol and carbon dioxide, and the carbon dioxide is going to come out through this airlock. The airlock keeps the inside of this nice and clean, so we don't have to worry about stuff falling in it or weird other yeasts coming into the process here. Okay, so that's the process. Altogether is about a 5 or 6 hour undertaking, but there's a lot of downtime. It's kind of like making bread. You have to do things and then you have to wait for a while and do more things and wait for a while. The setup that I have is not the fanciest setup, as you can tell. I'm using converted beverage coolers. I'm just kind of putting things up on the patio. There's a lot of things that we could get to make things a little more convenient and to be a little more precise about things. It would be nice to have some sort of a wooden structure to support everything while we're going. It'd be interesting to have a pot that you could boil that has a little spigot on the bottom, so I don't have to do that siphoning thing at the end there. But these things all cost money, so we're just kind of building things up bit by bit. What's next? The wort's going to sit in that bucket for about a week inside. I might put a heating pad underneath it. The house is a little chilly, so we'll let that go for about a week. After about a week, I'm going to transfer the beer over to a carboy, over to a different container. There's a lot of gunk that's going to settle out in this first week, and so that transfer will help clarify the beer. About a week after that, I'll put it in the bottles, and then about a week after that, it'll initially be ready to drink. We might let it set a little longer than that. It'll carbonate after about a week in the bottles, but the taste will be better if you let it sit in the bottle for a little while longer. So all told, from brew to drink, you've got about 3 or 4 weeks. So maybe we'll check in another couple of weeks and see how things are going. Okay, so that's it for this week. It's been pretty rainy, so there's not much else to show. Thanks so much for watching, and next week we'll do more fun things. All right, have a good week.